If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more epic HFY tales every day. Don't miss out on the next adventure. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're always the first to know when a new story drops. Liking this video helps us bring you more incredible stories, so smash that like button if you're ready for more. What would you do if you were in this situation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Which part of this story surprised you the most? Share your reactions in the comments. I love reading what you think. If you could add one twist to this story, what would it be? Let's get creative in the comments. What do you think happens next in the human versus alien saga? Let's discuss your theories below. In a sleek, high-tech classroom suspended in space, representatives from a multitude of alien species gather, their forms unique, some with tentacles, others with shimmering scales or long, graceful limbs. This class was for a very specific subject, Deathworlders, the inhabitants of planets deemed highly dangerous and uninhabitable by most civilizations. And among these creatures, humans stood at the pinnacle of mystery. Despite their unassuming appearance, they had survived, even thrived, on a planet teeming with threats. Dr. Elena Hawk, a human, stood at the front of the class, observing the various species around her with a calm, almost knowing expression. She had been through this countless times. The skepticism, the disbelief, and finally, the realization. Today, she would guide them through an experiment designed to test the true potential of humans. The aliens, however, were unconvinced, still mired in their preconceived notions about Earthlings. One particularly vocal skeptic was Zarthal, a massive alien from a world of tranquility and abundance. His species had evolved in a low-gravity environment, where brute strength was unnecessary, and survival was taken for granted. To him, the idea of humans having anything resembling superpowers was laughable. He wasn't alone. Whispers of skepticism rippled through the classroom. What could possibly be so special about these soft-skinned, frail beings? The experiment was simple, designed to highlight human strengths in physical and mental domains. Several challenges were laid out in the center of the room, nothing too complex, just enough to measure baseline abilities. A weightlifting challenge, a series of puzzles, and finally, an endurance test. The aliens waited, their expectations low, sure that the human participant would falter, if not fail outright. Dr. Hawk gestured towards Sarah, the human volunteer. She wasn't what one would call remarkable at first glance. Average height, average build, dressed in a simple workout outfit. She didn't radiate power or intellect. Her appearance did nothing to change the aliens' minds. Zarthal smirked. He expected this experiment to be over quickly. Sarah approached the weightlifting station first. Several large metallic weights were stacked in front of her, each progressively heavier. The aliens barely paid attention to the first few rounds as Sarah effortlessly lifted the lighter weights. These were nothing extraordinary by their standards, and they assumed this was the extent of her capabilities. But then the weights grew heavier. With each new load, Sarah didn't falter. The aliens grew silent, their smug expressions slowly shifting to confusion. She was lifting weights that no creature in the room could dream of moving. Her muscles flexed, but there was no hesitation in her movement. With a quiet determination, Sarah continued to lift, surpassing even the heaviest weight that had been placed in front of her. The room fell into a stunned silence. No alien had ever completed this portion of the experiment so effortlessly. Zarthal blinked in disbelief, his previously smug demeanor evaporating as Sarah continued her task, pushing the limits further with each round. His mind scrambled for explanations. Perhaps there was some trick involved, some unknown factor at play. He glanced at Dr. Hawk, who watched quietly, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. She knew this was only the beginning. As the experiment progressed, the aliens gathered closer, their curiosity piqued. They had come here expecting a spectacle of failure, but instead, they found themselves grappling with an unexpected reality. Something was different about humans, something that wasn't readily apparent at first glance. But none of them could quite put their appendages on it. Zarthal, who had initially viewed the experiment as a waste of time, now found himself captivated. He leaned forward, his massive form casting a shadow over the testing arena. "How can this be?" he muttered to himself, glancing at his fellow students, all of whom looked equally perplexed. No one had an answer. Dr. Hawk remained silent, her expression one of calm satisfaction. She knew what was coming next, the puzzle challenge, where Sarah would again surprise her alien audience, this time with the mental prowess that set humans apart from many other species. But for now, she let the silence hang in the air, allowing the weight of Sarah's performance to settle in the minds of those who had underestimated her. Sarah approached the weightlifting platform, her expression calm, almost disinterested. A few of the aliens exchanged amused glances, expecting this part of the experiment to pass without much fanfare. The initial weights weren't anything particularly impressive to them, just standard loads, meant to gauge basic strength. As Sarah casually lifted the first bar, a couple of snickers escaped from the group. Zarthol watched, arms crossed, clearly unimpressed. The next round began, with the weights increasing in difficulty. Sarah's form remained solid, her breathing controlled, and she lifted with little visible strain. This raised a few eyebrows, but nothing more. The aliens had seen strong competitors before, and this human didn't appear to be all that different. Then, as the weights increased beyond the expectations of the other species present, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Sarah lifted again, her muscles now showing some signs of effort, but she wasn't struggling. A few aliens leaned forward, their amusement turning to curiosity. The bar was loaded even further, this time surpassing the heaviest weight used in previous experiments. Some whispered among themselves. This was getting into territory that most species couldn't manage. Sarah approached the bar with a quiet confidence. She squatted, positioned her hands, and with one steady movement, lifted the load effortlessly. The room went silent. Zarthol blinked, his expression shifting from condescension to shock. No one spoke as Sarah placed the bar back down and stepped away, almost as if she had just completed a routine task. Her calm demeanor in the face of such physical exertion added to the growing sense of disbelief among the alien spectators. For a moment, the classroom was eerily quiet. Zarthol's brows furrowed. His species was known for their physical prowess, and yet he had never seen anyone, alien or otherwise, lift such a load. The weight Sarah had just managed was impossible by their standards. He whispered to a fellow student, trying to rationalize what had just happened, but found no immediate explanation. Murmurs spread through the group, rippling outward from where Zarthol stood. His fellow aliens were equally stunned. There were many stronger races in the galaxy, and none of them could have managed that. Zarthol's disbelief was mirrored in the wide eyes and murmured conversations around the room. He couldn't fathom how such a comparatively small and fragile-looking species could pull off a feat like this. It wasn't just the weight, it was the ease with which she had lifted it that had everyone stunned. Dr. Hawk remained quiet, observing the reactions. The aliens were scrambling to understand what they had witnessed. Zarthol was no longer standing tall with his arms crossed. He had taken a step forward, eyes narrowing at Sarah as if trying to figure out what made her different. He exchanged confused looks with his peers, and it was clear they were all thinking the same thing. How could a human, from a supposedly inferior species, perform at this level? Discussions broke out in pockets across the room, theories flying rapidly. Some speculated that perhaps Earth's gravity was much stronger than previously documented, forcing humans to develop superhuman strength over generations. Others proposed that humans must have some unique biological advantage. Maybe their muscles were built differently, designed to carry far more weight than expected. A few whispered that perhaps there was some unseen technology assisting her, though that idea was quickly dismissed by the more pragmatic observers. Zarthol's mind raced as he tried to come up with a plausible explanation. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The room was filled with advanced species, many far stronger than humans. Yet here they were, watching this earthling defy the most basic assumptions about strength. It didn't make sense. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized there was no simple answer. Humans, it seemed, weren't what they appeared to be. Dr. Hawk watched the scene unfold with a slight smile. She had seen this reaction time and time again. The aliens always thought they had humans figured out, but there was something about Earth's children that they could never quite grasp. She kept silent, letting them stew in their own confusion. They would reach their conclusions, but they would never truly understand what made humans different. Sarah, meanwhile, walked calmly off the platform, not caring about the whispered conversations or the looks of disbelief being thrown her way. To her, it was just another day, another challenge met. The aliens would never understand. Humans weren't just strong, they were resilient, adaptable, and more importantly, capable of pushing themselves far beyond the limits that other species could even imagine. And this was only the beginning. The second task began, and the energy in the room shifted from awe to quiet anticipation. This was supposed to be the real test, the mental challenge. The puzzle laid out in front of Sarah was a complex, multi-layered construct that required a combination of logic, intuition, and memory to solve. No species had completed it in less than an hour, and even those considered intellectually superior struggled with its intricacies. The puzzle was meant to confuse, to force the solver into patterns of thinking that required intense focus and repetitive trial and error. Sarah, however, didn't seem intimidated. She approached the task with the same calm confidence she had displayed during the physical challenge, which unnerved the watching aliens. Zarthal, though still reeling from the earlier shock, smirked again. Intelligence, after all, was something his species prided themselves on. Humans might be strong, but they weren't known for their intellect. Not in comparison to species that had evolved in controlled, orderly environments where knowledge and precision were paramount. Sarah sat down, her fingers brushing lightly over the strange shapes and symbols that made up the puzzle's interface. There was no clear solution at first glance, no obvious starting point. To the aliens, this was where the real difficulty lay. They had been trained to think in straight lines, to approach problems systematically. Yet Sarah didn't follow any obvious path. She began turning pieces and shifting elements of the puzzle with quick, almost instinctive movements. She seemed to know where to place her focus without needing to analyze every detail. The room grew quieter as her hands moved with fluid precision, and within minutes, the aliens were watching with furrowed brows. They were still struggling to understand what she was doing, while Sarah's mind was leaping from possibility to possibility, connecting pieces in ways that seemed random but clearly weren't. She didn't just solve the puzzle, she seemed to bypass the usual pitfalls entirely. Where the aliens saw confusion, Sarah saw possibilities. Where they struggled with rigid logic, she embraced chaos and adapted on the fly. Zarthal's smirk faded. He wasn't sure what he was seeing. In his mind, he had expected Sarah to falter here, to be bogged down by the complexity of the challenge. But she didn't pause. The puzzle wasn't slowing her down at all. It was like watching a predator in its natural environment, effortlessly navigating the terrain. The more Sarah progressed, the more baffled the aliens became. Sarah's success wasn't just speed, it was adaptability. The aliens, used to environments of predictability and order, couldn't wrap their minds around how someone could be so flexible in their thinking. They had evolved in worlds where every problem had one solution, one path. But humans, born in chaos, lived in a constant state of unpredictability. Their minds had evolved to adapt and shift without hesitation, to embrace uncertainty. And now, this adaptability was on full display. Zarthal leaned in closer, his eyes narrowing. He couldn't deny what he was witnessing, but his pride prevented him from fully accepting it. His people had always excelled in intellectual pursuits, but Sarah's approach to this puzzle was unlike anything he had seen. She wasn't overthinking it, wasn't trapped by rigid methods. She was solving it by moving outside the lines they had all been trained to follow. And then, just like that, it was over. Sarah finished the puzzle in under 10 minutes, her hands falling to her sides as the final pieces clicked into place. The room erupted in a mixture of stunned silence and frantic whispering. Alien professors, once calm and composed, now looked bewildered. No one had ever solved the puzzle this quickly, not even the brightest minds among them. The record shattered. Zarthal's mind raced. How? How had she done it? His thoughts tumbled over themselves, searching for an explanation. He wasn't alone. His fellow students and even the professors were at a loss. They tried to rationalize what they had seen. Some began discussing the idea that Deathworlders were simply better equipped to handle environments of chaos and stress. Others whispered that perhaps humans had evolved under such constant threat that their brains had adapted to solve problems faster, with less hesitation, than other species. Dr. Hawk observed the growing confusion with quiet amusement. This wasn't just about intelligence or raw processing power, it was about adaptability, something no alien in the room had fully grasped. Humans weren't the smartest species in the galaxy by traditional measures, but they were uniquely equipped to handle uncertainty, to think flexibly and outside the lines. Zarthol was beginning to see that too, though reluctantly. His worldview, once so certain, was being shaken by what he had just witnessed. Humans weren't just strong, they were unpredictable, capable of bending logic to their will in ways that defied conventional understanding. And in this galaxy, where so many species valued order and predictability, humans had an edge that no one had anticipated. The conversations continued, but the underlying realization was clear: Sarah had shown them something new. Something unsettling. And they were only just beginning to understand what it meant. The final challenge was set, and this time, the mood was different. The physical feats and puzzle solving had left the alien audience intrigued, but this test would push beyond strength or intellect. It was an endurance trial, simple yet brutal. The environment simulated harsh conditions designed to wear down the participants over time. Heat rose steadily, oxygen levels dropped, and the gravity was subtly increased, applying constant pressure to every movement. It was the kind of test that took its toll slowly, gnawing at the body and mind alike. Sarah stood ready, her face determined but calm. The aliens, confident in their own abilities, still believed she would eventually falter. Endurance, after all, was something many of them excelled at, particularly those who had evolved in stable, controlled environments. They were built for long-haul challenges. This was their domain, and they expected Sarah to crumble as the conditions worsened. Minutes passed, then hours. The heat intensified, sweat beading on every participant's forehead, including Sarah's. Alien students began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, their muscles trembling under the increasing weight of the artificial gravity. One by one, participants began to drop out. It was subtle at first, a stumble here, a labored breath there, but soon the cracks were visible. The environment was relentless, and those cracks widened with each passing minute. Zarthol, his earlier skepticism now tempered with curiosity, kept his eyes on Sarah. He could see the strain in her face, the tension in her muscles. She was sweating profusely, her breathing now heavy and uneven. Yet she didn't stop. Every step forward was deliberate, slow but purposeful. He could tell that her body was screaming for her to quit, to give in to the overwhelming exhaustion, but there was something else driving her. Something he couldn't quite understand. As more of the alien participants collapsed, some clutching their sides or gasping for air, Sarah remained upright, her posture unyielding despite the visible toll. Zarthol had expected her to break hours ago, and yet here she was, pushing herself far beyond what should have been her limit. He had seen strength, he had seen intelligence, but this was something entirely different. This was endurance of a kind that defied logic. More aliens began to drop out, completely spent from the continuous pressure of the environment. A few tried to push through, hoping to match Sarah's resilience, but they eventually succumbed to exhaustion. All the while, Sarah continued, her body shaking under the strain, her face a mask of determination. The air in the room was thick with tension, the whispers growing louder as more aliens began to take note of what was happening. Humans, they whispered, were not like the others. Where most species had an innate sense of self-preservation, of knowing when to stop before their bodies gave out, humans seemed to lack that entirely. Or rather, they seemed to possess something deeper, a refusal to surrender, even when every instinct screamed at them to quit. Zarthol, now standing at the edge of the testing area, found himself in awe. He had prided himself on understanding the galaxy's strongest, most intelligent species, but this? This was beyond anything he had anticipated. Sarah's willpower was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Her body was on the verge of collapse, her limbs trembling violently, her breath ragged and shallow, yet she kept going. She wasn't just surviving the test, she was outlasting it. Finally, as the last of the alien competitors dropped to the ground, unable to continue, Sarah was the only one left standing. Her legs buckled, and for a moment, it seemed like she would fall too. But even in that moment, she held on, pushing herself just a few steps further before her body finally gave out. She collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath, utterly spent. But she had done it. She had outlasted every other species in the room. The silence that followed was palpable. The aliens, professors and students alike, stood in stunned disbelief. This was no longer a simple endurance test. It was a demonstration of something much deeper, something they couldn't easily quantify. Sarah had shown them the true power of humans. Not their strength, not their intelligence, but their spirit. The unyielding, relentless drive that refused to give in, no matter the cost. Zarthul approached slowly, his mind racing. Everything he had believed about humans had been turned upside down. Their strength was impressive, their intellect surprising, but this was the most shocking revelation of all. It wasn't just physical or mental power, it was a force of will, a refusal to quit even when the body demanded surrender. For the first time, he saw humans for what they truly were, Deathworlders in every sense of the word. Beings who had evolved on a planet where survival wasn't guaranteed, where every day was a battle. Their bodies might be fragile, their minds unpredictable, but their spirit? Unbreakable. Dr. Hawk watched as the realization dawned on the alien audience. This was what made humans different. It wasn't just about what they could do, it was about how far they were willing to go. And for beings like Zarthul, who had never faced such extreme conditions, it was a lesson they wouldn't soon forget.